If you could choose to witness history, would you? The answer may seem easy, but consider for a moment the great pain that lies within our past. There are so many disasters and tragedies, both forgotten and remembered, that it would take multiple lifetimes to go through even half of them. When I say witness, that's what I mean, in the most basic form, and not alter. For if one has the power to enact change, it might not be the right course of action, because there's no way to know what mischief might occur as a result. All that is easy enough to say philosophically, but when you are thrown into someone else's shoes, literally and suddenly, with no notice of even who you are, let alone when and where, all you can do is react however is natural. This is how I found myself in charge of one of the most famous shipping disasters of all time. One second I was tucked up in my own bed, all warm and comfortable, drifting off to sleep. The next I found myself staring into the bottom of an empty teacup. Drawing it away from my face, it clatters against the saucer when it sinks into my lap. I'm sat on the edge of a bed. I can tell right away from the slight rolling motion of the room and distant drone of the engines that I'm on a ship. I also know right away that I'm a man. I don't need to be able to see myself to tell. I set aside the teacup and draw back the cuff of one wrist, wondering about the time. But alas, no watch. Although the stripes of the cuff of the navy jacket tell me I'm an officer. Patting myself down, I pull out a pocket watch. It's 11:20. But AM or PM? Maybe PM, or else I wouldn't be sat on my bed finishing a cup of tea. But I could be wrong. Getting up, I go out the door and with surprise find myself in a bathroom, not a hallway. My feet carry on moving and I head out a second door in the bathroom. Running on autopilot almost, I go along the hallway, make a right and a second right further along, then pass through a door at the far end. I'm on the bridge, and it's definitely night time. Passing through a door at the side, I go up behind the man in the wheelhouse. Noting the frigid chill in the air, I stare out into the night with a terrible feeling stirring in my gut. This is really, really creepy. I am not where I think I am. Sir, a voice says in acknowledgement. I look at the second man, already present, an officer, and realise he is addressing me. I thought you'd turned in for the night, he says. I can't settle, I mumble. Staring into the open area to the left of the wheelhouse, a cold wind rushes past. Cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the lights of the ship, I squint into the night. The still ocean stretches out before us, the brilliant stars splayed out above, unhindered since the sky is cloudless. The lack of a moon thwarting the stars' attempts to light the way. The night is beautiful, but that is of no consequence if I am where I think I am. Suddenly a bell clangs, and this is followed by a telephone ringing nearby. Yes, an officer says, at the same time the phone stops ringing. All I can think is, how do they see it? I can only make out the black of night and nothing more. Hard to starboard, he says urgently. And suddenly I see it, looming out of the darkness. Captain, iceberg, dead ahead, the officer says. Carry on, I nod at him, sounding calmer than I feel inside. He rings orders down to the engine room, and the wheelman calls out that the helm is hard over. There is no immediate change. We continue steaming straight for it. Just when I'm thinking history must be wrong and we are going to slam into the iceberg head on, does the bow begin swinging round. The iceberg is still rushing to meet us at an alarming rate, and from my position it looks as if it's passing within inches of our nose. Yet I can feel the faint trembling of the ship as we meet violently below the water. Hard to port, the officer calls out. The clapping of hands on wood resumes as the wheelman swings the ship desperately in the opposite direction. Some ice breaks off the berg and scatters across the deck below before the iceberg slips past us and out of sight. Panic sets in as I remind myself that I'm in charge. What did the captain do? I rack my brains, not wanting to change anything if I can help it. Close the watertight doors, I say, surprised by how calm my voice sounds. I am yes, sir, and it is done. One officer remarks to another that he should write it in the ship's log and note the time. Come on, what else? Calm down and think logically. Lifeboats, evacuation, sinking. We're still moving. Stop, all stop, I say. Orders are then rung down to the engine room. Find the carpenter and have him sound the ship. Yes, sir, comes the reply. It's so sad that this beautiful ship is doomed. So many people are going to die. Too many. I can't save everyone, but if I save more than history tells of, is it doing the wrong thing? At this point, it's probable that nobody thinks we're sinking. I mean, the Titanic was built as unsinkable after all. The disaster was such a big shock to everyone, just like 9/11 was. Nobody ever thought the towers could or would collapse. Apparently, in 1912 they were all so arrogant that it never occurred to them a giant hulk of iron and steel floating on the ocean is kind of defying gravity. It takes me a couple of moments to realise there was a queer tilt to the ship. We appear to be listing to one side, which startles me a bit. Then an incredible, great hissing noise begins, like 1,000 kettles all in the same room reaching boiling point as the build-up steam rushes to escape. A gentleman passenger comes up to me and asks why the engines have stopped. Mr. Ismay, one of my officers begins, but instead of saying more, he sighs deeply and turns his attention to the crewman who has appeared at his elbow and looks like he has something urgent to say. I thank him silently for the identification. We have struck an iceberg, my dear sir, I tell him. The damage could well be serious. Oh, he says, clearly taken aback. Without another word, he leaves the bridge. I'm afraid of missing a step because I've been put here by unknown forces, and I'm not an experienced captain. What happens if I don't do something because of that? Something that Smith did do? I pull out the pocket watch and glance at the time. It's about 10 to midnight. So how long since we hit? I suddenly find myself wishing I was a history buff. It would certainly help me a lot. An officer comes in and approaches me. Sir, I can't see any damage in the bow, but there's ice in the forward well deck. Thank you. I nod slightly at him. Seems like not long after he leaves, various crewmen appear on the bridge over the next few minutes to report the hold is taking on water and it's threatening to reach the mailroom. I leave the bridge, not entirely sure where I'm going, but hoping it's to inspect the damage. It sounds like an unsuitable endeavour at this point. Maybe by inhabiting Captain Smith, I somehow have access to some of his knowledge, because I do find myself below deck in an area which is flooding fast. As I walk through the ship, I almost feel like I actually know where I'm going. It's comforting. Whenever I pass a passenger on my rounds, I offer them a few words of reassurance. It feels like the right thing to do. So many are going to die horribly. There is no need for them to be in distress at this juncture. When I get back to the bridge, I give the order to get the lifeboats ready. The sooner that's begun, the better. I turn to see Ismay is back, and someone else comes in to report the level of water near the mailroom. I thank him, thinking I ought to take a look, and down we go to check it out. After all, it has been an unknown length of time since I went below. I'm just hoping this is the right thing to do. As I do the second walk around, I bump into a rather attractive gentleman who bears a strong resemblance to the man who portrayed Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, in the blockbuster film. He greets me and talks about the damage we have taken, that he's observed up to this point. But he's not finished his survey yet. Well, Mr. Andrews is alleged to be one of the people who knows the ship best. Hopefully he will give me a verdict when he's done. I mean, I know how this ends, but we haven't quite got there yet. We part ways and I return back to the bridge. We'd better start trying to dispatch the boats, I think. So I give the order to my officers for them to get the passengers on deck with their lifebelts on and start loading the lifeboats. Then I suddenly remember the radio room. Nobody is ever getting saved at the end of this if we don't call for help. But wait, I need to know where we are first. I ask the question aloud, and after some calculating, I'm handed a slip of paper with our position written on it. 41, 46 north, 50, 14 west. Thanking him, I head to the wireless room and am surprised to find it is not far behind the bridge. For some reason, I thought it was deeper in the ship. I find Phillips busy tapping out telegram messages from the passengers, but he stops and looks up when I touch his shoulder. "Bad news, boys. We've struck an iceberg, and I need you to send out a call for assistance," I say, handing them the slip of paper. "Here's our position." "Sir." Both operators acknowledge me and exchange a slightly alarmed look. Job done, I leave them to it. I'm stood on the bridge, pondering my next move, when Mr. Andrew appears. I know what he's here to tell me. It means I need to take charge, because that's what captains do in emergency situations. That means making sure everyone is doing what they are supposed to be, which I'm sure they are, but, it pays to check. Andrews lays out the facts over blueprints of the ship that he spread across the table. The short story is that we are doomed no matter what, and the ship has maybe an hour and a half left max. I thank him, trying not to show the fear that has welled up inside me at his words, and head to the boats. There I find myself giving the same order that Smith is famously reputed to have given, despite my advanced knowledge of the tragedy. How stupid is that? "Women and children first," I say, before heading to the other side of the ship and repeating my stupid order. An officer points out to me the lights of a ship that can clearly be seen a few miles off, and asks if he should signal them with distress rockets. I reply positively, despite knowing the futility of it. I didn't know there'd been a ship so close before. Why didn't they try and help? Are they blind? Whoever that ship is, they are clearly lazy and incompetent. Their lack of action is tantamount to murder. I hope they endured public shame that I've just never heard about. More lives could have been saved if they'd just taken their thumb out of their arse. Stood with my hands on the railings, I say a silent prayer for these people here, under my watch, who have been failed so tragically, and offer a mental apology to the ship too. I know nothing about commanding a ship, but give the passengers time to prepare themselves before I circulate the deck. Our time is so precious, but by the grace of God, we still have much of it. All the while, the frigid Atlantic is invading the ship at a rapid rate, millions of gallons inching through the lower decks, swallowing up the beautiful ship. I can't see it happening from here yet, but I feel the weight of it on my shoulders, as if I'm stood under a timer as it counts down to 0. Turning, I begin to walk around the boat deck. As I go, I see Ismay, who was before in his robe, but is now properly dressed, fluttering about, and gently but insistently urging the first-class passengers present to get into the boats. Sadly, at this stage, his efforts appear to be largely in vain. I find that this stirs up great frustration within, and have to hold myself back from shouting at them that we are sinking, and the situation is far more desperate than they realise, so just get in the damn boats. Inciting panic would not look good on Smith's record. I also catch my officer ordering a lifeboat lowered that is, by my estimation, only about half full, and challenge him. He looks at me with a mixture of shock and embarrassment, stuttering that it's going to return later to pick up more passengers. I shake my head no and order him to fill it now, saying that if passengers are unwilling, force them in, as this is not optional. He looks taken aback, and yet gives me the standard "yes sir" before calling for more passengers. Several are stood nearby, but none move. I leave them to it and continue round the deck. Then think better of it, and go back to that same boat. Bless him, my officer has strong-armed more people into it, and lowers it noticeably fuller. I accidentally catch his eye from my distant position as he starts to lower it, and give him a reassuring broad smile and firm nod of approval. Walking further round, I start to hope that I have not sullied his name any, and turned him into a bully. History should remember Smith as before. I soon find another lifeboat being released with too many spaces, and tell them to wait a minute, before shepherding more people into it. The passengers protest, but I'm sure they'll thank me later. At least I hope so. I mean, I don't care what people think of me, but it's Smith's reputation I'm gambling with here. I tell the men to carry on when I'm satisfied. First instructing the lifeboat crew to head towards that ship whose lights we can clearly see to summon help. I'm still acutely aware of that clock that is hanging over me, and know too much delay in releasing the boats will have dire consequences later on. That's what I'm afraid of anyway. Talking about later on, the boats are essentially little rowboats and appear to have no pre-stock supplies of any kind. It seems to me that a light is probably the most valuable thing they could have. Turning to a crewman, I tell him to fetch lamps for the lifeboats, and off he goes. I help with the loading of a lifeboat and notice my officer appears to have taken the women and children order to heart. He only lets a few men in, and it's on the provision that they can row. Once we've run out of nearby women and children, I invite some of the men congregated close to us into the boat. Noticing the officer looking at me funny, I remark how it is best to fill the boats with as many bodies as possible, now. Some of the men readily get in, their faces strained with fear, while others decline and step back. As we order it lowered, I tell my man to fill the boats, assuring him that when the women within sight are exhausted, it's okay to let men in. He acknowledges me, but I fear he's unconvinced of the wisdom in this. As I turn to head into the ship, the junior wireless man pops out of the crowds and gives me news of Carpathia's promise that she is on the way at about 4 hours' distance. Excellent, thank you, I say. I find my way down to the lower decks and come across a gated stairwell. The gates are locked and guarded by 2 stewards, who I'm shocked to see are armed. There are third-class passengers on the other side. Some look vacant, as if awaiting instruction, others glare at the stewards, and a small number are arguing with them when I arrive. Those poor souls never stood a chance. Frustrated words die on their lips as the passengers catch sight of me. "What are you doing?" I say, more harshly than intended. The 2 men spin around and gawk at me. "Captain," they gasp. I repeat my question and am informed curtly how it is the law to keep steerage separate and locked in, that I know that well. "I don't believe you understand the severity of our situation. Get those gates open, now," I growl at them. "Give them a chance." After a further dumbfounded moment, they comply. I make sure all the other gates are unlocked. If any crewman has any objections, tell him he will answer to me. The last part comes across very much as a threat, which is fine if it has the desired effect. The 2 men soon rush away, and the passengers emerge, embracing me tightly. "Oh, thank you, Captain. God bless you." "You need to get up on the deck," I say, my tone softer than before. "Follow me." The group, a mixture of men, women and children, trail behind me as I return upstairs. As we pass onto the lower lifeboat deck, I hear stewards deny them behind me. Rounding on the nearest, I pin him to the wall. "You would deny people a chance to live?" "Captain, sir, they're steerage," he says. With a roar of anger and frustration, I drag him across the deck and haul him over the rails, dropping him into the water. When I turn back around, the other steward backs away in terror. "Their lives are my responsibility. Turn them away at your peril, sir," I shout at him. He nods in petrified agreement, wide-eyed. "My apologies," I tell the passengers, and gesture along the deck with an open arm. "Come." They begin to rather timidly pass through the gate, and I turn to leave, as I do so noticing that all the crew who are loading the nearest boat are staring at me slack-jawed. Clenching my jaw, I stride past and return to see how things are progressing on the upper lifeboat deck. I offer a silent apology to Captain Smith. I fear I have altered his reputation. I need to control myself. I mean, I know how it was in this era. There was discrimination abound. It was just how things were, and means the poor got the short end of the stick. This disaster angers and saddens me in equal measure, and now that I'm actually here, that silent ticking clock looming over me, my emotions seem magnified. Back on the bridge, I'm alarmed to see the degree to which the bow has descended already. How are we doing for time? Pocket watch check reveals it's 1 a.m. And thankfully the deafening roar of the steam has now ceased. It looks like I'm back just in time. A lifeboat is about to be launched with only around a dozen people in it, the fewest I've seen yet. But my words mean nothing. It's exasperating. I halt its dispatch and quickly usher more bodies into it, then send it on its way. Bless him, Ismay is still minning around and helping as many into boats as he can. Only thankfully, passengers are more willing at this point. I assist with loading as many boats as I can in order to ensure more capacity is used. and am comforted by the presence of so many crew and passengers from the lower parts of the ship on the aft boat deck. Of course, it means increased competition for seats, but at least more third class are free to attempt to save themselves. Being chained below guarantees death. Panic is setting in, along with fear. There is a certain amount of pushing and shoving, with some either being pushed or jumping into the ocean. Gunfire confirms things are getting bad. Since the steam has stopped, I've actually been able to hear the launching and exploding of our distress rockets, which are still going up. And due to the sudden lull in sound, they make me start every time. I estimate the passage of time since my last check, but I'm too scared to look. The tilt of the ship tells me that time is running out. I return to the Marconi room and tell them we will probably not last very much longer. The engine rooms are flooding and the power could go out at any time. Going back to the bridge, I realise there is a very noticeable tilt to the deck, and that it is opposite direction to the previous tilt. How odd. If it carries on pitching this way, I dare say she could roll over. Now there's a scary thought. A lifeboat is being lowered nearby and looks to be filled to a respectable degree, but I order it halted anyway, after instructing the officer that stood nearby into it. I have it carry on. Might as well, he's just stood there, and so many crew have performed outstandingly under these difficult and unexpected circumstances, including my officers. If anybody's earned a seat, they have. Besides, I need them in the boats to help retain order. I feel as if the clock is ticking down faster than ever, and call the officer launching the rockets to abandon this task and instead take charge of loading one of the remaining lifeboats. Despite my best efforts, I can see at least 2 boats, which are only partially filled in the water. I call out to them via a megaphone, ordering them back to collect more passengers several times. Eventually one begins to turn, but a second continues to row away. Oh dear God. More boats are lowered as the ship slips deeper into the ocean. Taking a deep breath, I look at the time again. 2 o'clock. Rushing to the Marconi room, I find Phillips urgently banging out distress calls on the Morse key. You've done an outstanding job, gentlemen, but I fear there is nothing more to be done. Now is the time to look out for yourselves, I say. As I leave the room, the rapid tapping of the Morse key continues unflinchingly, and I wonder if he even knew I was there. Stepping back onto the deck, I spot Ismay answering a final call for a lifeboat about to be launched some way aft. At least I think it's him. Either way, I never knew how wrong they had him pegged. It's very sad. He spent a vast amount of time coaxing people into the boats. Who knows how many lives he saved. I feel, from the little time I spent around him tonight, that he genuinely cares about these people's welfare. During my own toing and throwing long ago, I did overhear Ismay exclaim in horror upon finding a lone woman on deck, declaring he thought all the women were already gone. He probably then marched her to a boat. I believe undoubtedly that he is one man aboard who, if it were possible, would personally save every soul on the ship, or at least all the women and children. It's a great shame that he is remembered as a coward because he survived. That does him a huge disservice. The lifeboats go, and the waterline continues rushing upwards. I station myself on the bridge and watch the bow sink until the water is touching the bridge. By now a chorus of terrified screams is piercing the night air, as unbridled fear consumes the others that are left on board. It's a chilling sound which cannot adequately be portrayed and pierces me to the core, almost invoking tears. As water laps around my ankles, I shut my eyes and breathe deeply. A strange sense of calm envelopes me out of nowhere, as if all is right with the world. Opening my eyes, I sit up in bed with a huge gasp and check myself with quivering hands. I'm still here, I'm okay, and I'm me again. Overwhelmed with emotion, I burst into tears, deep sobs racking my entire body as I cry for the Titanic. My God, it was so real. It felt as if I was really there, all these decades later, and I feel like I'm a survivor of the disaster. The trauma is unreal. Mercifully, a slow headache kicks in and my memory blurs, as if my mind is a reflection of water and somebody starts tapping a fingertip into it, creating ripples that prevent the image from completely reforming over and over. I lie back down, curling up on my front with my knees tucked under and my hands atop my head, the backs buried into the bunched up pillows until the accompanying light-headed feeling passes. When I feel certain the internal earthquake has fully subsided, I uncurl slowly. I'm Heather. It's the present day, and I'm home in bed. It's early morning right now. Okay, good. Sitting up in bed, I grab the squished pillow and hug it tightly for comfort. Why do I need comfort? I must have had a bad dream, but oddly, I don't remember it at all. I found myself to have a very good dream recall ability. Not all the time, of course, but I do remember lots and lots of my dreams. It's queer that one so traumatic should be totally gone this quickly. Glancing to my side, I notice something on the bed, where my pillow has been, and pick it up. In the early dawn light that's peeking under my window blind, I see it's a coin attached to a short little chain, and in that moment, it all comes flooding back. The memories come in flashes, like time has been captured in photographs in my mind, and I'm mentally flicking through the pack. The preceding one is me on the Titanic's bridge, with one hand in my trouser pocket and a coin between my finger and thumb. I can tell it's on a chain that's anchored to the trousers. Disaster then unfolds rapidly, with image after image popping into my mind's eye until I have most of the pieces of the puzzle. I feel like I've just been plugged into someone else's distant memories. Also, not all of the steps we took are shown to me, but that probably doesn't matter. Looking again at the coin, I turn on my bedside lamp so as to see it better. It's a gold coin with the year 1900 stamped on the front, but no monetary value marked on it. The image on the front is slightly worn down, as is the crown head on the reverse. Now I know this is because it was Captain Smith's lucky sovereign. He kept it chained to his trousers out of sight and frequently rubbed it thoughtlessly. Although I can't see why it was his lucky sovereign, nor how long he'd had it at that point, but feel certain he had put it on the pocket watch chain. I don't even know what a sovereign is, or have a clue what the Latin on the back says. I think it's Latin. I have no idea if it's real gold or not, but it's gold coloured, and I mean more gold than a pound coin. It's probably not gold though. I doubt anybody has made money out of real gold and silver for centuries, if ever. Old British money used to be pound shillings and pence. I know that, but what value is a sovereign? So many questions. It certainly has a good weight to it. Fetching my tweezers and a metal nail file, I gently extract the coin from the little chain. Then I remove the very long and sturdy silver chain that I never take off, and slip the pendant off, replacing it with the sovereign before putting it back on. If it was lucky for him, maybe it will be lucky for me too. Then I boot up my laptop and begin researching the Titanic disaster to see how badly I screwed up. Not that I was an expert or anything, but may have helped me if I was. The biggest disaster in maritime history killed 1,200 people because there weren't enough lifeboats. That's the long and short of it. The sinking was survived by about 1,000 passengers and crew. 1,000? That doesn't feel right somehow. The number 200 is stuck in my head, but it's right there on the screen. 1,000 survived. I remember putting people in the boats, and many being released half empty despite my efforts. 1,000 people really lived. Wow. So what about Smith? Well, he's apparently one of the heroes of the night. Smith took his duty to heart so much that he went against regulations and customs of the day by releasing third class and allowing them onto the first class boat deck. Accounts from surviving third class passengers tell how there was water flowing into their cabins and dining room, and stewards blocked them from going upstairs to start with. Many sat in the dining room with water around their knees. A lot of them had given up hope. When out of the blue, stewards rushed in, having changed their tune. Suddenly they were in a panic, and they frog-marched people upstairs to the boat decks. Rumours on deck told that the captain threw punches at stewards after they turned passengers away from the boats, and angrily told them to get everyone up there. In the end, about half the group dragged upstairs lived. That's my interpretation of the account anyway. Historically, both Smith and Ismay were seen on deck much of the night helping load the boats, but I find mentions of Ismay doing this rare. He is remembered as a coward because he survived, when so many didn't. And there I was, thinking custom only says the captain has to go down with the ship. After the ship had vanished, many boats went back and tried to rescue those in the water screaming for help. At least 24 were pulled from the freezing water, and some lifeboats were over capacity when the Carpathia arrived hours later. Sadly, some of those saved by the lifeboat occupants died before rescue came, including senior Marconi operator Phillips, who was previously last seen on deck running aft with passengers and crew as the ship went out from under them. Phillips was pulled into lifeboat 12, but soon after fell asleep, and was certainly dead when checked some time later. The other Marconi operator, Brady, was left clinging to and then precariously balancing on an upturned lifeboat with a few others after it fell on him from atop the officers' quarters. He lived. My eyes are too misted with tears to read more at this stage, and I turn away from the computer. I'm not quite sure how to feel about this. I don't just mean the Titanic disaster, but this whole thing. Time travel is the ultimate sci-fi dream, but it's usually essential to have some kind of device in order to go anywhere. Yet all I need to do is fall asleep. Now, this wasn't my first jump, but it has been a while. I have no idea what triggers it, or when it started, because it took me a long time to twig what was going on. The headache is normally a sign that I have altered something. I'm not sure why I have this gift. I don't mean to change history, and I have no idea if that is even why I'm there. As if there isn't enough turmoil in my life already. I don't need this too. The hardest thing I'm dealing with at the moment is the deep depression. This includes self-hatred galore, and lots of time crying alone in my room. At least it's a decent hour now, and I can get up and try to have a day.